Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Makkot. We are up to Perek Aleph Mishnah Yud. Today's Mishnah Yud should be Le'ilui Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana Ranbai, Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov, Chana bad Miriam, Sason ben Rai, and Yoshua ben Shifra, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen, and Le'avdil ben Chaim lechaim, V'le'refuah shelemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, V'tor Shayachu le'Yisrael, and Achlama me'erav Binyamin, Or Tzion Chai ben Dvorah. The chapter ends with various laws related to capital cases. The Mishnah first discusses a person who escaped after being sentenced to execution for committing a murder. The cases where a person was convicted in a court outside of Eretz Yisrael, he then escaped and was brought back to the same court which had moved to Eretz Yisrael. Mi shenigmar dino barach. If someone was sentenced to death in a court outside of Eretz Yisrael and ran away before his execution, and he was caught and brought back in front of the same court that had convicted him, but the court had now moved to Eretz Yisrael, en sotrin et dino. Nevertheless, the judges do not reconsider his sentence to try to find any reason to acquit him. Rather, they execute him right away. They do not have to reopen his case because they are the ones who convicted him and will not likely change their decision. However, if the condemned man is brought to a different court in Eretz Yisrael, they do reopen his case because being in Eretz Yisrael brings merit to a person, and this merit might cause the judges to find a way to pardon him. The Mishnah now states the law when the criminal is recaptured and brought to a different court outside of Eretz Yisrael. Kol makom she'amdu shnayim yomru, wherever a convicted murderer is recaptured and brought to a court outside of Eretz Yisrael, and two witnesses stand up and say, Mi'idin anu beish ploni shenigmar dino bebet dino shel ploni, we testify that so-and-so was sentenced to die in the court of so-and-so, meaning the court in which so-and-so is the Chief Justice, uploni edav, and the witnesses who convicted him were so-and-so and so-and-so, the defendant is killed right away, based on the other court's verdict. The second court does not have to judge the case themselves. This law, that a person can be executed based on the word of witnesses who testified that he was sentenced to death, applies only to a person condemned to death for murder. If a person was condemned to death for any other capital crime, for example, desecrating Shabbat, he cannot be put to death unless the two witnesses who saw him commit the crime. Unless the two witnesses who saw him commit the crime testify against him again. In this case, he has no extra merit, and therefore there is no reason to assume that this court will come to a different decision than the first court did. The same applies if he was originally convicted in Eretz Yisrael. Even if he is later brought to another court in Eretz Yisrael, they do not reopen the case. Since he was in Eretz Yisrael during his original trial, he has no additional merit now that he did not have then. Now, capital cases were judged by courts known as Sanhedrin. That consisted of 23 judges. The Mishnah teaches Sanhedrin noeged ba'aretz u'b'chutz la'aretz. The Sanhedrin functions both in Eretz Yisrael and outside of Eretz Yisrael. These courts were located in every city in Eretz Yisrael, as well as in places throughout other countries, and the judges on these courts had the authority to carry out capital punishment in every place, as the Gemara says on page 78 in Masechet Makkot. Now, a person cannot serve as a judge for capital cases unless he is ordained in Eretz Yisrael through a process known as smicha. Once he is ordained, he may judge capital cases even outside of Eretz Yisrael. Now, these courts were able to give the death penalty only while the great Sanhedrin of 71 judges sat in the temple. This period ended 40 years before the destruction of the second temple, as the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, page 41a. Although the Torah prescribes a death sentence for a number of crimes, there is a mitzvah for the court to try its hardest to find ways to pardon criminals and avoid putting them to death, so much so that the Mishnah notes, Sanhedrin haoreget echad b'shavua nikret chovlanit. A Sanhedrin that kills someone once in 7 years is called a destroyer. In most cases, if the court is knowledgeable and puts in the proper effort, they will find some way to acquit the accused. Such a court will usually carry out the death penalty less than once in 7 years. Therefore, if a court convicts someone every 7 years, they are likely not judging properly and are considered a destructive court. If it is clear that a defendant is guilty and the judges can find no way to acquit him, they are of course required to execute him as the Torah commands, even if they have to execute many people in a single day. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says a Sanhedrin should not give the death penalty more than echad l'shivim shana, once in 70 years. Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva omrim, Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva say, Ilu ha'inu b'Sanhedrin lo ne'erag adam me'olam. If we would have been on a Sanhedrin when they were judging capital cases, Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva were indeed members of the Sanhedrin, but only after the court stopped giving the death penalty. But they said if we were on a Sanhedrin that was judging capital cases, no person would ever have been executed. We would have asked the witnesses questions that they would not be able to answer, which would make their testimony invalid, and therefore the accused would not be put to death. Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva hold that the court should avoid ever having to carry out the death penalty. To accomplish this, they should try to invalidate the testimony by asking the witnesses questions about the crime that are virtually impossible to answer. If witnesses do not know the answer to a question that is necessary for the punishment of the crime, their testimony is invalid. For example, they can ask the witnesses, can you be sure that the victim did not already have a deadly internal wound that would have killed him within a year? A person with such a wound is considered dead with regard to many laws, and a person who kills him cannot be executed because he is considered to have killed a dead man. Since the witness cannot be sure that the victim did not have such a wound, the defendant will not be executed. Although usually we do not suspect that a person has such a wound, if we ask a witness this question and he does not know the answer, his testimony is invalid. However, another Tana rejects this practice. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Af hen marbin shofchei damim b'Yisrael. They too would have increased the number of murderers among the Jewish people. If murderers would never be put to death, people will not be afraid to commit murder. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel was particularly concerned about murder and not about other capital crimes, because no other sin is as destructive to civilized society as murder. Therefore, although we try not to carry out the death penalty too often, we do carry it out when necessary. And that is the end of Perek Aleph Mishnah Yud. We continue now with Perek Bet Mishnah Aleph. This chapter discusses the punishment of exile, galut. Someone who kills a person in an inadvertent manner, shogeg, must leave his home and go into exile in one of the several Arei Miklat, cities of refuge. He must stay in that city until the Kohen Gadol dies. If he leaves the city before then, a relative of the victim is permitted to kill him. This Mishnah discusses the types of killings for which the killer must go into exile. Elu hen nagolin. These are the ones who go into exile. Hareg nevish bishgaga. One who kills a person bishogeg, meaning he kills in a way that is not completely unexpected, nor is it extreme negligence. The killer should have been more careful, but he was not extremely irresponsible. The Mishnah gives examples of shogeg killing. Ayam me'agel b'magila. Someone was pushing a roller, which is a round stone tool used to smooth out plaster on a roof. Now, in the times of the Mishnah, houses had flat roofs that were covered with a layer of plaster. The plaster would form a slight incline, which would prevent rainwater from collecting on the roof. If cracks would form in the plaster, one would fill in the cracks with new plaster and use a roller, which was a tool consisting of a smooth round stone, to smooth out the plaster. To use the roller, the roofer would stand at the high point of the roof. He would push the roller downward toward the edge of the roof and then pull it upward toward himself. If he was pushing this roller, and as he was pushing it downward toward the edge of the roof, the roller slipped out of his hands, and fell on a person and killed him, or he was lowering a barrel from a roof with a rope, and the rope slipped out of his hand, and the barrel fell on a person and killed him, or he was climbing down a ladder, and he fell off and landed on a person and killed him. In all these cases, the killer goes into exile. Now, in the following cases, the killer does not go into exile. However, if he was pulling a roller upward on a roof, and it fell on a person and killed him, or he was raising a barrel with a rope, and the rope snapped and the barrel fell on a person and killed him, or he was climbing up a ladder, and he fell on a person and killed him, in these cases, the killer does not go into exile. And the Mishnah gives a rule that summarizes the differences between the first three cases and the second three cases. This is the rule. Whoever kills inadvertently while he was doing a downward motion, meaning he was either moving himself or an object downward, as in the first three cases, he goes into exile. But whoever kills while doing an action that was not downward but upward, as in the second three cases, does not go into exile. Only when a person kills while doing a downward motion is the killing considered shogeg, and it is only in such a case that the Torah ordered the killer to go into exile. This is learned from a verse in the Torah in Bamidbar, chapter 35, verse 23. And the Rambam explains in Echot Rotzeach, chapter 6, halakha 12, that when a person kills while bringing something upward, it is completely unexpected, and a person does not go into exile if he kills in an unexpected manner. However, when a person kills while bringing something downward, he should have been more careful to ensure that it did not fall, since heavy objects tend to fall more easily while they are being lowered. Therefore, it is considered a shogeg killing. The Torah gives some examples of shogeg killing for which the killer goes into exile. One of the examples is as follows. It's from the book of Dvarim, chapter 19, verse 5. If one comes with his friend into the forest to chop wood, and his hand swings the axe to cut the tree, and the iron slips from the wood and finds his friend and he dies, the killer shall flee to one of these cities of refuge. The Mishnah cites a dispute as to the exact case the Torah is referring to when it says the iron slips from the wood. Nishmata barzel mikato ve'arag. If a person was chopping wood and the iron blade of his axe slipped off its handle and flew out and killed someone, the law is the subject of a dispute. Rabbi says, Eno goleh, the wood chopper does not go into exile. Although the Torah states that a person who kills while chopping wood goes into exile, it is not referring to this case. According to Rabbi, this case is not a shogeg killing, but rather negligence, since the wood chopper should have made sure that the axe blade was attached firmly. But the sages say, goleh, he goes into exile. When the Torah states that the iron slips from the wood and kills, it is referring to this very case where the iron blade of the axe slips off its wooden handle. The wood chopper must go into exile as the Torah orders. Mina etz hamitbakea. On the other hand, if a person was killed not by the axe blade, but by a piece of the tree being chopped, as the wood chopper was cutting a tree, a piece of wood flew out and killed someone. Rabbi says, goleh, the wood chopper goes into exile. When the Torah says the iron slips from the wood, it is referring to this case where the iron blade of the axe causes some wood from the tree to slip off and fly. While the sages maintain that the wood in the verse refers to the wooden handle of the axe, Rebbe holds that the wood refers to the tree. So the verse is read, the iron makes the wood slip, meaning the iron blade of the axe causes a piece of the tree to fly off and kill someone. The wood chopper therefore goes into exile according to Rebbe as the Torah orders. But the sages say, no goleh, he does not go into exile. The Torah does not refer to this case, but rather to a case in which the axe blade killed, as mentioned earlier. According to the sages, the case of the wood flying from the tree is not shogeg killing, but it is considered unexpected. The Rav does tell us that Halakha follows the opinion of the Chachamim. And that is the Nabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.